Alright guys, so happy February. It is Black History Month, so we will be talking about famous, um, pretty much well-known, or what most people might not see as well-known African Americans throughout the month. It will be happening every Friday, so I know I'm a day late, but to start for my initial plans, but we're going to be doing it every Friday. Today we will be talking about Rosa Parks, pretty much her early life, um, the roots of her activism, along with when she got arrested and the Montgomery bus boycott that she was well known for having, along with her afterlife. Afterlife as in after the boycott, and then going in from there. If you don't know who Rosa Parks is, she pretty much helped initiate the civil rights movement in the United States when she refused to give up her seat to a white man on a Montgomery, Alabama bus in 1955. This is when her actions have inspired the leaders of the local African American community to organize the Montgomery bus boycott. This was led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As we know, his birthday was in January. And the boycott lasted at least over a year and made Parks lose her job. And it ended when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. Over the next half a century is when Rosa became nationally recognized of dignity and strength in the struggle to end the entrenched racial segregation that was going on. In her early life, she was born on February 4th, 1910, so she would have been 111 years old on February 4th, which is coming up, in Tuskegee, Alabama. She then moved with both of her parents to Pine Level, Alabama at the age of 2. So this was roughly in 1915, to reside with her mother's parents. Her brother, Sylvester, was born in 1950, so this would have been in between the time that Sylvester was born, or a little bit after. But shortly after this is when her parents split, so it would have to be when they moved to Pine Level, when her parents separated and her brother was born. Rosa's mother was a teacher, and this helped put value in education in the family. Then Rosa would move to Montgomery, Alabama at the age of 11, and she would then go to high school in the area. The most recent of high schools that she would go to would be the Alabama State Teachers College, for Negroes. If you don't know, Negroes was pretty much what African Americans used for their term of community. It wasn't black, it was mainly Negroes. It's not like today where everybody thinks that it's a bad word. And we now use the term African American now to help represent the colored people, not like Mexican, but the darker, well, black community. Then but then Parks would leave when she was 16, which was early within her 11th grade year, to help with the care for her dying grandmother. And then shortly after her grandmother dying, she would have to help her mother because she became ill. And with that being said, in 1932 is when Parks would marry Raymond Parks, who was a self-educated man who was working as a barber at the time, but he was also a longtime member of the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, which we know now as NAACP. He supported Rosa in her efforts to earn her high school diploma, which she would ultimately earn the following year after being married to Raymond. Now, what actually pretty much what were the roots of Rosa Parks's activism? Pretty much Raymond and Rosa were respected members of the Montgomery's large African American community. At this time was when Rosa was a hairdresser, or a seamstress. Both of them were coexisting with the white people in the city, governed by the Jim Crow laws, which were pretty much about segregation. Mainly it was giving daily frustrations, such as African Americans could attend only certain schools, could only drink from certain water fountains, could only borrow books from an African American library, along with other restrictions. So pretty much everybody can attend school, can go to a library and read, but it had to be, they had to be separated from the white community, or would have to sit in the back of the classroom or something like that in order for them to attend, not actually being able to just, like how most teachers would do, put them in groups, 4 in the table or 4 in a group to help separate the kids, or maybe even do alphabetical order on last name from A to Z, which would mix the kids up and then go from there. That wasn't really allowed in the early 1900s. Which, again, became more frustrating for the African American community. Raymond had previously pretty much discouraged her out of the fear of her safety in December of 1943. Rosa also was also the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP, was in that and became the chapter's secretary at the time. She was working closely with the president of that chapter named Edgar Daniel Nixon, or what most people would refer him to as E.D. Nixon. Now, Nixon was a railroad porter, and he was also known in the city as an advocate for African Americans who really wanted to register to vote at that time, because that was also another big deal, is that African Americans could not vote. I know that the women's rights were coming on to where they could vote, but it still was harder for African Americans to vote at this time. But he was also president of the local branch of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters Union for the railroads. Oh, excuse me. Now, let's talk about pretty much how Rosa Parks gets arrested. It's December 1st of 1955. She was 42 and was really pretty much commuting from a long day at work when she was working at the Montgomery Fair department store by the bus. Now, the African American residents of Montgomery would often avoid the buses because they pretty much found that the Negroes in the back policy was too demeaning, which would mean that the bus driver would, if there wasn't enough room in the white communities section, the bus driver had the right to actually tell the African Americans to get up and move so that there was more of a section in the African American, or more section seats for the white community. And this is what pretty much goes on down here in the next section. So the segregation was written into law, which meant that the Montgomery bus was reserved for white citizens, and the seats behind them were for the African Americans. It was also a custom that, like I said, bus drivers would have the authority to ask the African Americans to give up a seat for the white riders. There was a contradiction to the Montgomery laws in the books. One was segregation must be enforced, and then two is that no person, no matter what the color was, could be asked to give up a seat even if there were no other seat on the bus available, which caused majority of everybody to stand up and have to ride the bus like you see now if there's not enough seats. There was one point in the route that there was a white man that had no seat because of the fact that all the seats in the designated white section was taken. Excuse me. This is when the driver asks 4 of the colored citizens to actually stand to add another row in the white section. There were 3 citizens that actually obeyed, but Rosa Parks was the only one who did not listen and did not do what the bus driver asked. When what Rosa Parks says in her autobiography is that people always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired. But that isn't true. I was not tired physically. No. The only tired was tired of giving in. So she was pretty much standing up for herself, and that she was getting tired of having to give in to what the white citizens had to say and what they had control over. This is when some police officers would approach the bus and helped with the situation, but then Parks was placed into custody at this point. And then that kind of resolved into the Montgomery bus boycott. Even though Rosa kind of put her one phone call into calling her husband, the word of her being arrested had already spread quickly into everywhere. And by the time that E.D. Nixon heard about it, he was already there with Parks when she was released not the following night, but that night of December 1st. And then this kind of gave Nixon that hope of finally finding the courageous African American of unquestionable honesty and integrity to become the plaintiff in the case, that actually might be able to help with the validation of segregation laws. But it took Nixon a lot of time to actually convince Parks and her husband and her mother that she was that particular plaintiff. But there's another idea that kind of rose into his mind when trying to convince them about what he was hoping for. It was pretty much that the African American population of Montgomery would then start boycotting over the buses on the day of Parks's trial, which would have been literally the day after her birthday, Monday, December 5th of 1955. So she would literally just turn 48 at this moment. Excuse me. There were about 35,000 flyers that were made to be handed to African American school children to be sent home to their parents so that they could be informed on what was going on about the boycott. Now, on December 5th, this is when Parks was found guilty of violating the segregation laws, to where she was fined $10 and then a $4 court cost. Back then, in 1955, that was a lot. Today, we think of it like, oh, that ain't nothing. I can pay that and be on my way. No, it was a lot of money. And no one could pay that immediately unless they actually saved for it. But this was something that wasn't really expected to happen, actually. Then there were African American participants in the boycott was a little bit larger than what most of the anticipation within the community would see. This is when E.D. Nixon and some of the ministers would come together and want to take advantage of the momentum from the boycott. to form the Montgomery Improvement Association, which is MIA, to help manage the boycott so it wouldn't go so outrageous from the African Americans and the white citizens in the community. Um, but they elected Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who's only 2016 at this time. 2016, who's only 26 years old at this time and new to Montgomery, to become the actual president of MIA. It's not, like I said, it's still the Montgomery Improvement Association, not Missing in Action. I promise you. A lot of people think Missing in Action and Montgomery Improvement Association are the same thing. No, it's not. It's not. Anyways, there were appeals and related lawsuits that went through the courts, but this was something that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which now the Montgomery bus boycott would receive so much anger from the Montgomery white population, along with some silence, but it ended up to the point where E.D. Nixon's home and Dr. Luther King Jr.'s home would be bombed at this point. But it really didn't change the demeanor of the boycotters towards their leaders. But the drama kind of continued, and it gained the attention, hoping to gain the attention from national and international press, hoping to spread the word to show that segregation is not okay. But by November 13th of 1956, the Supreme Court had ruled that the bus segregation was unconstitutional. But the boycott ended December 20th of the same year, which again, it's over a year. If I remember correctly, it was like 386 days or something like that when it happened. And the reason why is because it was the day after the Supreme Court decided to have a written order sent to Montgomery to make it finalized. Rosa Parks at this time lost her job and experienced so much hatred and harassment within that year that she now was known as the mother of the civil rights movement. Which pretty much, so this was pretty much the first thing for civil rights to actually start to make its way into making equality for African Americans and whites to do the same thing. Even though it's still kind of hard. But after the boycott, Parks, along with her husband and mother, eventually moved to Detroit, which is where Sylvester, Parks' brother, would reside. Rosa then becomes an administrative aide in the Detroit office of Congressman John Conyers Jr. in 1965, which she held this job until her retirement in 1988. Her husband, brother, and mother all died between the years of 1977 to 1979, which is really hard on her, But 10 years after the deaths in 1987 is when she co-founded the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute of Self-Development to help Detroit's youth to give them the self-development that they need to be better people. And then within the following years, she would travel to lend her support to the civil rights events and causes to help bring awareness. And then she decided to write her own autobiography, Rosa Parks, My Story. And then in 1999 is when Parks won the Congressional Gold Medal, which is the highest honor of the United States bestows on a citizen of the country. When she died at the age of 92 on October 24th, 2005, she became the first woman in the nation's history to lie in the honor at the U.S. Capitol. With that, it became the start to a new beginning. And pretty much the start of how one woman changed the face of the African American community. Next Friday, we'll be talking about Maya Angelou and going from there. And like I said, each week's going to be a different person until March. There's probably going to be a new series coming in March. I'll also add in different things for YouTube other than the Black History Month, like the history of Mardi Gras, the history of Valentine's Day, and then President's Day is coming up, so that's going to be an extra video for you guys. But other than that, I shall see you on the next video. Bye.